So the theory that I decided to choose to teach y'all is obviously one of my favorite theories and something that I can relate to and kind of hit home for me when I've been studying at Dallas Christian College for the past 3 years, and it's behavioral theory, which is I think something that obviously we can all relate to psychology, but this is a theory that I think we can all really relate to because it's a it's obviously our behavior and how we behave due to our environment. And kind of a definition for y'all to refer to is behavioral theory is learning based on the idea that all behaviors are acquired through conditioning, which in a conditioning occurs through interacting with the environment. So that kind of means, to break it down into an easier term for y'all, and the easier way for me is that we learn from our environment. So the way we are and the reason we are the way we are is because of our environment. We learn things, whether it's from our parents, our family, our friends, our social media. We learn things based on our environment. So we are the way we are because of our environment. Our parents or your guardians, whoever raised you, obviously taught us how to talk and to walk and our P's and Q's, our manners and everything like that. And that's kind of something that falls under the behavioral theory, is our personalities and the way that we are is based on how we were raised as kids. And so I think that that's like really important, especially when we're reflecting on ourselves and kind of wondering why we are the way that we are. And we can really look at this behavioral theory and determine I am this way because my parents raised me this way and this is the environment that I grew up in. Our environment, like I said, makes us who we are, but another thing that behavioral theory does is that it helps treat and test anxiety, depression, substance abuse, mental illnesses is something that behavioral theory also intertwines with. Another thing, behavioral theory, they will like pick your brain and things like that. Like, I'm personally have like abandonment issues, and I was taught at a young age that people were going to leave my life. And so that's kind of how I feel now, which is another thing that we can look at, is that if behaviors can be learned, they can be unlearned. And I think that that's something that a lot of people forget or don't think about, is that just because you are the way you are doesn't mean it's permanent, it's forever. You can unlearn things, and you don't always obviously remember everything, but when you learn things, you can unlearn things. So that's a quote that I had gone, human behavior is learned, thus behavior can be unlearned. So a new behavior can be learned. So whether you don't believe something or something's conditioned in your mind for you to think the way that you do, you can unlearn those things. And I think that that's a really good point that we all have to kind of remember with the behavioral theory, is everything's not permanent. We can change things and we can relearn things or unlearn things. Our response to the environment also shapes our actions. So how we respond to things in our environment makes us react to our environment and to who we are. So if you totally agree with something that's happening in politics or in the football or in the sports world, that makes you who you are. And human behavior, like I said, is learned. And I think that I like to, when I teach or when I'm trying to learn things, I like to correlate them with other things that, whether it's something that's going on in my life or something I'm watching a TV show or a movie. And I think the best example that I can use for behavioral theory is Game of Thrones. And if y'all haven't watched it, you should. But I like to correlate like the behavioral theory with Game of Thrones because there is a character and his name's Theon Greyjoy, and he was raised up to believe that he was of high blood. His father was a king, and he's the only last living son of his legacy and everything like that. So he's very important, and he's a good warrior, and he's a good person. He has lots of money. Well, he ends up getting kidnapped and tortured, and he ends up, it's the behavioral theory kind of intertwines with this because the person who's torturing him conditions him to think that he's like a peasant and he's nothing, he has nothing, he is nothing, he doesn't matter. And he even conditioned him to forget his name and believe that his name was something different. So I think that that's something, and I learn better that way when I correlate things that I like into these theories, because it makes more sense to me. And he ended up getting tortured and mentally messed up so much that he didn't believe in his past, basically. And so that's a thing that we can look back into. In the beginning of my video, I said we can learn things and things can be unlearned. So he learned that he was of high blood and he was very important, he had lots of money, and then this guy conditioned him to believe, no, none of that's true. None of those people care about you. You aren't going to be king. You don't have any money. This isn't Theon Greyjoy isn't even your name anymore. And I think that that's something that I really noticed in the show. I was like, oh my gosh, hey, I learned that. But I think that's the biggest thing when y'all are learning, is to correlate things together. So I think that the two things that we can get out the most out of this theory is that behavior equals environment. So your environment equals behavior. So the way that you behave is the way that you're reacting to your environment. And then the other thing is that if it can be learned, it can be unlearned. And I think that those are the two biggest things we need to take out of this behavioral theory, is that based on the fact that we can learn things and we can be taught things, but we can also be unlearned. So not everything is permanent. So just like Theon Greyjoy was raised up and he learned all of these things, and then he got taken over by his master, is what they called him, and he made him totally believe something different. He reconditioned him to believe that this is his life now. He never had anything to do with being a king or being high blood or anything like that. So I think the two things in the behavioral theory is that environment equals behavior and behavior equals environment. And then another thing is if human behavior can be learned, it can be unlearned as well. So thanks for watching my video. I hope y'all learned something about the behavioral theory.